Hello everybody and welcome to my channel today. Today's episode is going to be the third episode of the basic principles of cooking. If you haven't checked out the first episode, check that one out. It's about time, temperature, and the appropriate time to add flavorings and seasonings to your dishes. The second episode, which was last week's episode, is dry heat cooking methods. And today's episode is moist heat cooking. So let's get started. Moist heat cooking is when the food item is submerged in liquid or exposed to steam. The first form of moist food cooking is poaching, and poaching is a convection cooking process. Poaching is a method of cooking in a liquid when the liquid is between 160 and 180 degrees Fahrenheit or 71 to 82 degrees Celsius. So poaching is done in water that is simmering and not bubbling, because if your water's bubbling, that's boiling. You can actually poach in a number of different liquids, including stocks and broths and court bouillon. There are three different types of poaching. The first type is submersion poaching, and that is where the food item is completely covered by liquid, but not by too much. Shallow poaching involves just enough liquid to go halfway up the food item and be brought to a simmer, then covered and finished on the stovetop or in the oven. Cuisson is the term used for the liquid in a shallow pan poaching. The next is simmering, and simmering is also a convection process. Simmering is a method of cooking where food is held in liquid at 185 to 205 degrees Fahrenheit or 85 to 96 degrees Celsius. In simmering, there is slightly more surface action than in poaching. Simmering involves just a few air bubbles breaking the surface. Poaching is generally used with foods that need to be tenderized through long, slow, moist cooking. The third type of moist cooking is boiling. And boiling is where you want all your bubbles. In boiling, the cooking liquid needs to be at least 212 degrees Fahrenheit or 100 degrees Celsius. Water freezes at 0 degrees Celsius and boils at 100 degrees Celsius. Few things are actually cooked via boiling outside of starches and potatoes. Boiling is not a method commonly used for many other food ingredients. Yes, vegetables can be boiled, but I'm going to be honest, the best way to cook vegetables is steaming. I would never recommend boiling a vegetable. Ever, ever, ever. Don't boil your vegetables, please. Steam them. And speaking of steaming, that's the next moist cooking method we're going to talk about. Steaming is usually done by placing the item in a basket or on a rack over simmering water. Steaming is often associated with delicate flavors and ingredients, such as fish and some veggies. Steaming enhances flavor while retaining nutrients. Flavors can be introduced to delicately flavor the food, and a sauce can be made from the steaming liquid. Next, we have braising, which is a combination dry and moist cooking method. In braising, the food item is first browned in a pan in a small amount of fat at high temps, and is usually accompanied by veggies and seasonings, and then cooked at low heat over the stovetop or in the oven through simmering or steaming in liquid 1/3 to half up the side of the item. Braised items are usually served with the sauce made from the cooking liquid. Braising is not the only combo method cooking game out there. There's also stewing. And stewing is usually associated with small pieces of food where the food is first browned in a pan in a small amount of fat and usually has veggies and seasonings added. Stewing is a cooking method primarily done through simmering the liquid that completely covers the food item until the pieces are tender. Generally, stewing is a shorter cooking process than braising. So now we've covered all of the moist methods of cooking, or wet methods of cooking, depending on how you want to look at it. I know some people don't like the word moist, so let's say wet methods of cooking. We're going to go on to some terminology now that's related to cooking. And the first term is basting. Basting is when you moisten food during cooking with melted fat, pan drippings, or sauce or other liquids in cooking processes such as grilling, broiling, and roasting. This is used to add flavor and prevent drying. The second term is carryover cooking, and carryover cooking happens when you take a food product, like say out of the oven, and it sits on the counter. It continues to cook before it starts to cool down. This is why when you're making like a steak or a roast and you're taking the temperature of that steak or roast to determine doneness, you want to pull it out when it reaches about 5 to 10 degrees cooler than your ideal temperature, because once you take it out of the oven, it will continue to cook. And if you've cooked it to your desired doneness, and if that doneness is like medium well, you will end up with a well done roast or steak. So it's very important to understand carryover cooking. The next one is blanching, and blanching means to partially cook items very briefly in boiling water or hot fat. Usually this is a preparation technique for use with other cooking methods. Blanching can be used to loosen peels off of vegetables, fruits, and nuts, or to prepare an ingredient for freezing. One example of when blanching is used on a vegetable is in a concassé. And a concassé is when you quickly blanch a tomato and then throw it into cold water, and it causes the skin to peel away and makes it much easier to remove the skin before you do something like stew a tomato or use it in a sauce. Another common use of blanching is with French fries, and so that's when you briefly take the French fries and you submerge them in hot oil, and then you take them out and hold them for when they need to be cooked to order. And it's also a secret behind some really great French fries. Next we have deglazing, which is to dissolve cooked particles of food sticking to the bottom of the pan using swirling liquid. Deglazing is commonly used when making a pan gravy. After deglazing, there's glazing. And glazing is to apply a sauce, aspic, sugar, or icing to give a food shine, as well as make it able to brown or melt under a broiler, a salamander, or in an oven. The next term is to griddle, which means to cook on a flat, solid cooking surface called a griddle. Then there is a parboil. Parboiling is to cook partially in boiling or simmering liquid. It's similar to blanching, but does not use oil. Parcooking is to cook partially by any method of cooking. Parcooking is a method commonly used in professional kitchens, and it's used in order to get your order to your table faster. So they just pre-cook a lot of the food and hold it, and then they finish it off when you order that food. Parcooking and parboiling are usually used for ingredients that require a longer cooking time, such as with meats and root vegetables. The next cooking method is en papier, and en papier means in paper. This method is commonly used with salmon and involves putting a protein or a vegetable or both into parchment paper, sometimes tin foil, and sealing it up and having it cook in its own moisture and juices. Reduction means to simmer or boil until the quantity of the liquid is reduced. This is often used to concentrate flavor or to thicken a liquid. Searing is another term in the kitchen. Searing means to brown the surface of food quickly using high temperatures. And the final term is sweating. Sweating means to cook slowly in fat without browning. Sometimes sweating is done under a pot or pan cover. So sweating sometimes happens when you don't want it to happen. When you're trying to fry an item, usually meat, and the pan gets crowded and it's unable to evaporate the moisture, and so it sits in the moisture, and it results in usually an undesirable texture and flavor of the food. So it's very important to make sure you spread out your ingredients to prevent sweating, unless sweating is what you want. Next, we're moving on to the Maillard Effect, which is a scientific process that results in browning and is many small simultaneous chemical reactions that occur when proteins and sugars in and on your food are transformed by heat, producing new flavors, aromas, and colors. The Maillard reaction is a chemical reaction between amino acids and reducing sugars that gives brown food its distinctive flavor. Seared steaks, fried dumplings, cookies, and other kinds of biscuits, breads, toasted marshmallows, and many other foods undergo this reaction. Browning creates new flavors that are intrinsic to the cooking process. The Maillard reaction is responsible for bread crusts and chocolate and coffee and dark beers and roasted meats. Both caramelization and the Maillard reaction require relatively high temperatures beginning above the boiling point of water, which is 212 degrees Fahrenheit or 100 degrees Celsius. The sequence begins when a carbohydrate molecule and amino acid bind together in an unstable structure, producing flavorful byproducts. The involvement of amino acids brings nitrogen and sulfur, creating meaty and earthy flavors. These reactions create the crust on seared food and the brown coloring of a good roast, as well as multitudes of other brown foods. Pressurization can actually trigger the Maillard reaction. Smoke point. Smoke point applies to fats and oils. There are a number of different oils with varying smoke points, but a smoke point means the burning point. A smoke point is the temperature at which an oil or fat begins to produce a continuous bluish smoke that becomes clearly visible depending on specific and defined conditions. If you're interested in learning more about fats and smoke points, please check out the link in the description below to a previous video I made about how to select the appropriate fats and oils for your cooking. So I think that wraps up the basic fundamentals of cooking. To recap, we've covered time and temperature and flavoring, we've covered dry cooking methods, we've covered moist and wet cooking methods. At this point, you should have a pretty solid understanding of which ones are wet or moist and which ones are dry. Please leave me a message in the comment section below. Let me know if you learned anything, if there's anything you'd like clarified. Thank you for stopping by to watch my video today, and as always, have a wonderful day.